Hi everybody, I'm Susan Mulvihill. Welcome back to our vegetable garden in Spokane, Washington. As you can see, we're still having a very mild winter, and I have to admit it's really making me excited for spring to get here. Now, I wasn't intending to shoot a third video on indoor seed starting, but I've gotten a few questions and I thought, if one person has that question, I bet you 10 others have the exact same question. So I'm going to address those today. But first, I have a laundry list of things that I want to cover in this video. First of all, I'm going to give you an update on how the seeds I started indoors are doing. I'm going to show you a rather unusual method that Bill uses to start onion seeds indoors. I'm going to talk about the timing of seed starting. There's been some confusion over that. Also, how to know when your last frost typically occurs. And I've got some resources for that. I want to explain the difference between cool season and warm season vegetable crops. I'm going to show you a resource that I have on my website that is free, and it will help you with the timing of planting your seeds. I also want to talk about a controversial issue, and that is when to start your tomatoes from seed, because we all love to do that, right? So let's get indoors and get started. I wanted to give you some seedling updates. So you'll recall that I planted 3 seedling trays with lettuce seeds. And if I take this off, you can see that I got 100% germination, which is awesome. So since everything is up, that means I can leave that plastic dome lid off. You might be using a plastic bag or a plastic wrap on the soil. You want to get that stuff out of the way. That means it's time for me to keep a close eye on how much moisture is in these little seedling trays. And sometimes what you can do if you're not sure if the soil is dry is you can just lift up the seedling trays, and if they have a little bit of weight to them, they've still got moisture. But if it feels pretty lightweight, you definitely need to water them. Again, you're wanting that soil to stay lightly moist. At this point, the only thing that I need to monitor is the water, because they've got these tiny little seed leaves. They don't have their true leaves like I explained last time. Those are the mature type of leaf. So I'm just making sure they're moist, and that's it. What about those pak choi seedlings I showed you last week? Well, here are the 2 seedling trays, and it's 2 different varieties. One is called Bopak and the other is Green Jewels. And now you can more easily see what a true leaf looks like. You can see there's been quite a lot of growth. And this is the time for me to start fertilizing them. As I mentioned last week, I like to use Alaska fish fertilizer to feed the seedlings, and I use a very weak dilution, so half as much of the fish fertilizer to water. And there are all sorts of seedling fertilizers that you can buy. They need to be high in nitrogen, and that is the first of the 3 numbers that you always find on fertilizer packages. And I've got it in one of those soda pop bottles with one of the bottle top waterers on there. And the goal with fertilizing is to water the soil, not the foliage of the plants. If you are new to using plant lights, the goal is to have the lights about 2 inches, maybe 3 inches above the tops of your plants. But some types of plant lights vary in their intensity, and so you have to kind of watch the seedlings, make sure they don't look like they're getting scorched, and adjust the lights as needed. Now I've got this one up high because I wanted to be able to show you the plants. I want to put the lights back into place. But what do you do when you have plants that are this tall versus the tiny little seedlings? These ones, if I leave them as is, are going to be farther away from the lights. So something that you can do is to just take like a piece of wood or a book or another bottom tray that doesn't have any holes in it, and just bump it up a little bit. So now what I can do is I can lower this light and both the taller plants and the new little babies are going to get plenty of light. So keep that in mind as your plants grow. A lot of times you'll be starting things at different times, of course, and so they'll be different sizes. Now chances are you've seen this craziness on the next shelf down and you're wondering what it's all about. So I wanted to cover that next because it's actually really interesting and cool. So Bill loves to grow onions, and what he does is he plants a whole bunch of onion seeds in each of the containers. So he's not limiting himself to maybe 6 seeds or 9 seeds. He's got a ton of seeds in each of these. And what he does is he lets the seedlings grow maybe to about 5 inches tall, and then he gives them a haircut with some scissors down to about 2.5 to 3 inches tall, lets them grow up again, gives them another haircut, and so on. And what that does is it helps the plants focus their energy on developing a good root system rather than focusing on growing all of this greenery because it's not needed yet. When it's time to transplant them out into the garden, what he does is he carefully removes this mass of plants from the container, and he also carefully teases apart the roots. And what he does is he will give the roots a bit of a haircut, so he trims them back, maybe gives these one more trim of the leaves, transplants them in the garden at the proper spacing, and they grow great. So this is something you might consider. You could certainly start them indoors now. I've been getting some questions from folks who also live in a cold climate like we do, and they want to know if it's time to start their tomatoes and peppers indoors. Well, the short answer is no, it's too soon. But the thing is that I had mentioned in my first video that you want to take a look at the back of your seed packets because they are great resources, and they will typically tell you start these seeds X amount of weeks before your average last frost date. But if you're new to gardening or you're new to your area, you might not know when that is. So first of all, you can ask a gardening friend or neighbor, when is the last average frost date here? You also can ask your local Master Gardener program, and if you don't know how to get a hold of these wonderful people, all you have to do is a web search on the words Master Gardeners, and then put in the name of your county and the name of your state, and you will see their website and how to get in touch with them. Their help is free, and it's such a great resource. Now I have one more resource for you that I wanted to show you. If you go to the National Gardening Association's website, you'll notice there's a menu that says Useful Tools. Just use the drop down and you'll see there is one that says Frost Dates Lookup. That's what you want. You can enter either your zip code or your location. I'm going to use my zip code. And it gives you a chart and an explanation of the first and last frost dates for Spokane, Washington, and the probabilities of these temperatures occurring. So if I go to this chart down below, I'm real interested to see, okay, when is it least likely to be 32 degrees for the low? And it says May 18th. Well, I've been gardening here a long time, and that is pretty darned accurate. So I'm quite impressed with this. If I want to be a little bit more cautious, I'll go down to the next line for the last likely day to be 36 degrees for the low, and you can see it's June 9th. So this is a very interesting chart. It's about the most accurate one I've ever seen. I've been hearing from folks saying that they are really impressed with this. So I wanted to let you know about this tool, and I'd be interested to hear what your experience is when you put in your information and look at your resulting chart. Now let's talk about cool season versus warm season vegetable crops. Cool season crops should be planted earlier in the season, and they are more tolerant of cooler temperatures. Examples are arugula, beets, broccoli, carrots, kale, lettuce, parsnips, peas, radishes, spinach, and Swiss chard. Warm season crops want nothing to do with those cooler temperatures, so they are typically planted after all danger of frost has passed. Examples would be basil, beans, corn, eggplants, melons, peppers, pumpkins, summer and winter squash, and tomatoes. With most of these veggies, it's a good idea to start them indoors ahead of time, especially if you have a shorter growing season like I do, so that the seedlings are ready to go outdoors when the time is right. Now, as promised, I wanted to talk a little bit about the timing I used for starting my tomatoes from seed indoors. Now, just like you, I always used to get so excited about starting my tomatoes around the 1st of February. The problem is that we can't plant tomatoes outdoors in our zone until late May, maybe even the first week of June. So the poor plants would languish in their pots, they'd become leggy and generally stressed. That isn't the best way to get your tomatoes started in life. I know a lot of folks want to have the first ripe tomato on the block, but if your plants are leggy and pot-bound, well before it's time to transplant them out into the garden, that isn't a good thing. When I was researching different types of plant disorders that vegetable plants can have for my book, The Vegetable Garden Problem Solver Handbook, I learned that many of them can be brought on by being stressed early in their lives. Several years back, I decided to start tomatoes later. At first, I went with 2 weeks later thinking, oh, that's got to be enough time, but the plants were still leggy and pot-bound when it was time to transplant them. I tried 2 weeks later than that, still problems with the plants. I repeatedly moved the seed planting date later over the course of a few years until I finally discovered that a starting date of the second week of April is ideal. The plants will be a nice size, but not too leggy. And they'll be growing great in their pots until they get to officially go out into the garden. So you might need to experiment a bit, but I encourage you to try to wait until about 4 to 5 weeks before your last frost date and see how they do, because unstressed plants will grow super quickly once they're out in the garden. I should add that if you're curious about when to start pepper plants, they do require a bit more time to get going, so I would recommend planting the seeds indoors about 8 weeks before your last frost. I have another free resource on my website that will help you with the timing, but again, remember to see what the seed packet recommends. Just go to susansinthegarden.com, go to the guides menu, and if you go down a ways, you'll notice there is seed starting, when to plant vegetables, all zones. So this works for every zone. And what I did is I put the name of the crop in the first column, and then whether you should start them indoors or outdoors and what the time frame is. So let's say you're going to grow eggplant. You need to start them from seed indoors 8 to 10 weeks before your average last frost date, and then it says when to transplant them out to the garden. Now if I go back to the guides menu, you'll notice that there's also seed starting, when to plant vegetables in zones 5 and 6. So because I garden in those zones, I thought maybe a chart with specific dates would be helpful for folks who are also gardening in the same zones. So in this case, I have specific dates such as start basil indoors April 15th, transplant it around May 30th, or sow them directly outdoors May 30th. Basil does not like to get cold, so that's why it's such a late planting date. but this will also be of help to you. Okay, that's everything I wanted to cover today, and I hope you're feeling a little bit more confident about when to start your seeds and what to do once they come up. Thanks so much for watching today, everybody. Happy gardening.